Yeah. Just to play with the mind with a couple of little Zenisms. There's that story of the acolyte who goes to the Zen master and he says, "Master, I have anger. It arises in me and I don't know what to do about it. Will you help me?" And so the Zen master says, well, show it to me. We'll deal with it. Show me your anger. And the acolyte said, "But I'm not angry right now." So the master said, "Well, that means that anger is not part of your true nature, and since anything impermanent is not real, your anger is a phantasm." And in that moment, the acolyte had some degree of enlightenment. And then there was the acolyte who went to the Zen master, and the Zen master looked at him and said, "Tell me, what is your understanding?" So the young acolyte waxed lyrical about emptiness and the nature of emptiness, that everything was impermanent, nothing was real. Then all of a sudden, the Zen master, who was smoking his long pipe, leant over and slapped the acolyte over the face with his pipe, and the acolyte jumped up in anger, his eyes flaring blood red. The master said, "Well, if everything is emptiness and nothing is real, where does this anger come from?" And you know that story that was told a couple of weeks ago about Mola Nasruddin, when it came to the ears of the great Sultan that Mola Nasruddin had mystical powers. So the Sultan called him into his presence, but the Sultan was a really garrulous, arrogant, rather cruel, bad-tempered man, and he said to the Mullah, "Tell me something extraordinary right now or off comes your head." So the Mullah looks up and he said, "I can see your parents sitting on celestial thrones in heaven. I can see your mother wearing a crown of fine jewels and your father wearing a cloak of ermine." Oh, the Sultan was very pleased with this, and he said, "Tell me, Mullah, where do your great powers come from?" Mullah said, "Fear. Fear will do it every time." Then there's another story about the great Maimonides. In this instance, he was just called Maimon, but we know he was a great physician and a great philosopher. So it so happened he was called into the presence of the emperor of the day. And when Maimonides arrived at the palace of this emperor, the whole hall was filled with physicians and doctors of all kinds and ilks from everywhere, all over the place. And as it transpires, the emperor was seeking a personal physician, and so he'd gathered all of these doctors and physicians from all over the lands to choose who was to be his personal doctor. So there were tests that took place, and finally there were only two candidates left, and one was Maimonides and the other was another physician by the name of Newman. Now it was to be decided between these two who would be the personal physician. So this Newman, he was rather an opinionated man, and he said, "Oh, to the emperor, you have to choose me. You have to choose me because I have great powers. I can even make the blind to see." Oh, the emperor was duly impressed with this, and he said, "Well, prove it to me." So Newman called in a man who had his eyes rolled up into his head, and Newman said, "Well, this man has been blind since birth. So Newman took out some ointment out of his little doctor's bag and he rubbed it on the man's eyes, and then he said a little incantation over it. And suddenly the man said, "Ah, miracles! I can see! I can see!" Well, of course, the emperor was very impressed, but Maimonides smelled a rat here. Something was not right. So he went over to the blind man who could now see, and he held up a piece of cloth in front of him, and he said, "What is this?" And the man said, "Oh, it's a scarf." And Maimonides said, "What color is it?" And the blind man said, "Oh, it's red." And of course Maimonides said, "Well, if you've been blind since birth and you've just got your sight back, there's no way that you'd know that this piece of cloth was a scarf and that it was the colored red." So of course it was revealed that this was all just a setup. So, but of course the Newman purported that it wasn't him, it was the man who deceived him. It was the man who deceived him. He hadn't lied at all. And really, the emperor should choose him as his physician. And besides, Newman said, "I'm a man who knows all of the poisons, and I know all of the antidotes for all the poisons, and you know what courts are like. There will always be someone in the court who will try to poison the monarch, the emperor." Well, this made great sense to the emperor. So he said to the both of them, "I'm going to put you in a room together. You're going to eat and drink whatever it is that is shared between you, and whoever survives this will be my physician." Well, Newman had his little dilly bag, and in that he had all his concoctions, and during the time that they were in the room together, Newman fed these poisons to Maimonides, but on each occasion Maimonides was able to find the antidote for these, and of course Newman couldn't understand this. But after a few days, Newman began to get very worried. He got so worried, he stopped eating and he stopped drinking. He stopped washing, he stopped changing his clothes, because he couldn't work out what Maimonides was doing. How was he trying to poison him? And after some days, Newman was so desperate, so thirsty. He saw Maimonides drinking a glass of milk, and he thought to himself, if he's drinking it, then it must be all right. And he grabbed the glass of milk and glugged it down. "Ah," said Maimonides, "I knew that you would finally crack." What's in the milk?" says Newman. And immediately he goes off to his dilly bag, and he tried, because there was no taste in the milk that he could taste. There was no particular poison that he could taste. So he went to his bag and he tried every kind of antidote, extreme cure that he could find. And he took it. The next day, when the servants came, they found the cold, still body of Newman lying on the tiles of the courtyard. Now when the emperor called Maimonides to him and said, "How did you do that?" Maimonides said, "I'm a physician. I would never kill anyone." Newman died of fear, because he believed that I was about to poison him. So the fear rendered him incapable, and brought about his demise. So we can talk about this. We can talk about anger. We can talk about fear. And we know that anything impermanent is not real. And yet we still have these emotions. We still have these feelings that arise. Sadness, anger, frustration. If in this place where we find ourselves that we really are recognizing that anything that changes is not real, what is it? What are these emotions? What is it that arises in us with this input of life? Because it's always something outside ourselves that brings about these responses, isn't it? So to look at, understand and live emptiness and know the nature of emptiness, we need to understand the nature of these emotions. Isn't it so? So we can look at these stories, these first two little Zen stories, and we can recognize that we can be frozen with fear. Or we can do something absolutely extraordinary when fear arises. If we're standing outside a burning house and we know there's a child inside, fear, and yet it gives us an extraordinary force and power that brings us into that house. Or we can be, as we know, frozen with fear, incapable of moving in our life and in our dreams. Haven't you had that experience? In your dreams, being frozen with fear, reaching an impasse. So to look at this, and again to use these stories to allow us to have a gleaning of an understanding, we can reconcile these two in our life, which again brings us to the answer, what is it that arises when stillness and movement meet? But this stillness, when we abide in it, we recognize that it is just that. It is a space. It is an emptiness. We call it stillness, but behind that stillness there's nothing at all. And yet when something in life comes to meet it, there's a response to it that we would give a name to, that evokes a sadness in it, or that invokes anger in us. And we act accordingly, isn't it? We act accordingly to that. If we're angry, in most instances, we will try to tamp it down. Oh, I shouldn't get angry, really, spiritual people don't get angry. All of that stuff we say to ourselves. So, rather than look at the nature of anger or the nature of frustration, how would we define these emotions now relative to this place in which we find ourselves? For the most part, still, present, aware, alert. And when something comes into our ages, something arises that we will judge with our mind to be this or that. How can we define emotion now? And they are emotions, aren't they? What's behind emotion. If we just take all of those and we give them the name emotion, what's behind emotion?
A thought.
A thought is what gives it the name, isn't it? My thought makes it anger or frustration.
Movement?
Movement, yes, it is movement, of course. What is it that's behind emotion, or behind response, or behind reaction?
Nothing.
Nothing is where it arises from. This is a force,
It's
isn't
energy.
it? Energy, absolutely energy, isn't it? It's an energy.
Yes. Well, where's that come
But
from?
it has a story, no? This energy has a story
Yes,
in our past. Or it depends if it's a reaction or if it's an emotion.
if we just now take it into its form, whether it be a reaction or a response, and we recognize that whether it's a reaction or a response, it's still emotion,
Okay.
Could one say a stimuli?
a stimuli, yes. And this is something that's come from the outside, that's evoked in us an emotion. And now to ask, what is behind that emotion? And we can define it as energy. It's a force, isn't it, that impels us to react, respond in some way. And then the mind will judge it and take whatever action is that after that, or I'm going to go and punch a person, or I shouldn't get angry, or whatever it is, it's going to produce something in life. So if we're looking at this question, what is it that happens when stillness and movement meet? And we have no need to define these things like frustration or anger, analyze them as we could do philosophically till the cows come home. But take it in its pure form. We recognize it as some emotional response, which we can then define as an energy. So if it's an energy, and then we have energy meeting this stillness, then we have some possibility of gleaning what it is that is there, present, when those two meet. Does that make sense to you? This movement.
Sort of.
And we know that movement is created by our relationship with life. Otherwise there's no movement. So whatever comes in is going to touch this stillness, behind which is really nothing, except if we have an ego structure there. It's going to react according to that conditioning. But it's going to produce something out of that when this is empty stillness, isn't it?
It's going to create a response.
It's going to create a response. So if we're looking at answering the question, what is it that happens when stillness and movement meet?
Energy arises.
Energy arises. Something happens. When it goes down the channels, it comes up as a thought, a deed, or
And how do you deal with that energy? In that moment.
You don't deal.
so this is the paradox between these two little stories, little Zenisms, isn't it? Where does this anger come from? And it's not real. It's not your true nature. So let's go back to that little story about Jesus Christ walking along the road, and people are decrying him and scolding him, and he turns around and blesses them. And his Peter says to him, "Why didn't you scold them back? Why didn't you?" And Jesus says, I can only spend what I have in my purse. I can only spend what I have in my purse.
So his energy, regardless, the energy that came, that he met,
Yes,
he was able, well, it didn't affect him or something.
it,
There was no anger.
There was no anger.
There was nothing,
Right.
no response.
He didn't have the anger to give back because he didn't feel the anger.
all right, all right,
At that time,
Okay.
he must have felt compassion instead of anger.
yes.
So hang on a minute. Okay, something external happens and you've got perfect stillness over here. And that hits that and creates energy,
Right.
right? Well, how can this energy be changed in response?
It can't. It can't.
It
The
can't.
question that's the basic question that's asked here is, what is it that is created when stillness and movement meet?
Energy. And then it's up to us to judge it as right or wrong.
Yes.
Or not necessarily
No,
up to us, but we do
spontaneous.
seem
And
to judge it.
going back to the story of I can only spend what I have in my purse, the Zen master says, if this anger will show it to me. He said, I can't show it. It's not your true nature. What is that true nature? For the moment, we're calling it stillness. But we, in our own lives, can recognize now what it is, all right, to coin that phrase, what it is we have in our purse. When someone abuses us in the supermarket, and before we say, oh, how dare you say that to me? I'm so and so and so and so, and I haven't done anything to you, blah, 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 blah. It would be totally different now, wouldn't it?
No, I got angry last week. That's why I'm really interested in this story.
So you realize there's
And
some...
I've been questioning, where did that come from?
Oh,
And what is it?
that's right.
I can't seem to understand. Okay, so everything's a mirror. So I'm looking within to try and find out where this anger arises in me on this particular situation.
Yes, yes.
But what a great story. Obviously my purse.
It
There's
makes
something wrong with my purse.
absolutely right.
But
And you have to drop the mirror.
How about Jesus kicking over the tables in the, the money changers tables? Because he would have had some sort of, I don't know if it was anger then, but some sort of, when he
That's right.
Chuck the Pharisees
He got
out of the
angry in the
temple.
church because they were making money in the church, and he pushed over all the tables in anger because everybody was exchanging for money and things like that. He got angry.
But
So
it
that
say,
story
it
goes.
doesn't say in the Bible that he was angry.
It does not.
Doesn't
No,
it?
it does not. It does not. He just turned the tables.
Right action.
Yes.
Right action.
No, right.
Anger.
There's a response.
Action. Yes.
So he probably did it without anger, just with focus.
We have to look at ourselves. There's that other beautiful story about the Zen student who came to the Zen master. He said, Master, I've just been reading the Bible, and in the Bible it tells the story about how Jesus came and he beat the olive tree. Can you tell me why he did that? And the master turns to him and says, become a Jesus Christ and you know why he did that. So this is the same situation, isn't it? Go back to our own experience. Now we can have these as our awarenesses and examine that. And it does take us back not only to what do I have in my purse, but what is it that's there now? When someone abuses us or there is some force that comes into our life, and before we would react in some way with anger because there was conditioning there, a me there that it would bounce off. But now we find it's different. We don't personalize it. we don't take it on. We
But
can.
what happens when something affects how you function?
The same
I
thing.
mean, this sort of illusion that we're all in.
Yes,
it is,
yes.
Whatever it is.
Yes.
When somebody does something that affects what happens in that world of yours in a detrimental way, how can you just be...
But that's a judgment, isn't it? And so there's something there that's judging that as being good or bad. Where is this place where Jesus can say, I can only spend what I have in my purse, and you realize that there is only one thing in his purse, whatever it is that's given to him. Just like the begging bowl, whatever is put in the begging bowl is you see what's being said?
Find that, I think.
And it doesn't mean you don't do anything. I think that's the thing.
No,
You
he
can
didn't.
still act.
Jesus is blessed to the...
Perhaps.
It's not inaction,
That's
is
right.
it?
All I know is I think that being angry is just not a very nice thing.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't feel
All
good.
right.
There's the judgments, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what happens to that, like it did with in the second story with Maimonides, it comes back to if it's fear or anger, and it's taken internally, it kills us. One way it poisons us.
But it usually comes when you're totally exhausted and it just hits you out of the blue.
Mhm.
And I have that too. Anger comes up, fear comes up,
Yes.
and then I have really trouble. I try to control it.
And there we go.
I know, I'm such a control freak.
That's right. Because we judge that anger as being bad.
So there's really different level. Wherever we are at, there's a surrendering to the feeling. But behind these feelings, I don't know where I want to go, but at the end, I feel that all these answers we are giving are different level of understanding.
But bring it down, we can only bring it down to our personal experience, and in our personal interaction with life, to recognize that as a spiritual journey, we're dropping away the conditioning, that which is going to react, that which sees things as a mirror. And our interaction with life allows us to recognize those various stages, to come to recognize what it is we have in our purse, because we all of us go through the stage where we recognize that anger or whatever it is theirs. And so you would give out love in return to make them feel better. I mean, we all go through that phase. Oh, poor thing, they're upset about something. Just send love to them for a minute, try to make it better. And then you go even beyond that, because you recognize beyond that stillness is just a space. So we can only have our own lives to bring recognition of this. And this is why these questions are given. What is it that happens when stillness and movement meet? We're there in our life every moment. We know stillness now, isn't it? You know that well.
Yes, but you forget it sometimes.
We do. We get caught in that movement.